my salon. Oh, so wonderful to see you again. Henriette Julie, may I say, you are looking magnificent as always.
You are too kind, Mary Catherine. This is your gift of hospitality, I think, to always make us so many of the best and brightest so welcome in your salon. Indeed, that is why I have chosen to bring a new guest here to enjoy what you can offer. Allow me to introduce my cousin, Charlotte Rose, newly arrived from the country, for the usual reasons. But I could not allow her life to be dissipated in petty entertainments. I needed to bring her as soon as possible to your salon, the heart of wit and wisdom of culture itself here at Versailles. Charlotte Rose, allow me to introduce to you the Baroness d'Aulnoy and the greatest, the best of salons.
I'm so honoured to
Ah,
be here.
thank you so much, Henriette Julie, and welcome, Charlotte Rose, to Salon.
I've heard that you do lots of wonderful things in the salon, and this is my first time. So could you tell me a bit more about what I might expect?
Well, in my salon, as you know, my darling, our salons are full of very talented women who love to talk about literature and philosophy and art and this new exciting phenomenon that I've heard about called science. But the special thing about our salons is that we like to take stories from long ago and transform them into something magical, so magical that we call it de fées, fairy tales. And you know, my dear, I was the first person to invent that. We women don't have schools. All we have is convents and nunnery where we sit around and learn how to read and write, but we don't know how to employ that reading and writing to put it into action. But in our salons, we can make new worlds with our intellects. In our stories, fairies are the creators. Fairies are the people who have power. Well, the creatures of wonder who have power, and they're able to transform and transfix and create worlds of wonder, that the sort of worlds that we actually want to live in, my dear. Because I think the truth is, the world out there for us women is, as we all know, it's trying and difficult to be a woman in this world.
Oh, indeed, indeed.
Yes, yes. And so you have created, well, we are all learning to create these worlds of wonder and to share them with each other, but not in the hearing of His Majesty the King.
Oh, goodness, no. Because you see, darling, our salons are like an antidote to the court of Versailles. In Versailles, they're always gossiping and talking about who's sleeping with who, but in our salons, we are feeding our minds, our intellects. We're discussing new ideas and ways of being and thinking, something they can't possibly do in Versailles. They're so worried about power and sex and money.
Well, when you speak of that, you have the very reason that our dear Charlotte Rose is with us. But we may lean just a little into the gossip. I mean, how else are we to know who is who and who is with who? You'll learn all about that, Charlotte, Rose, as we go on, yes. And to celebrate the stories that we have that somehow seem to tell a little bit about the world around us and the world within.
Might you have a story that you could share now?
I do indeed. It's one I'm working on just at the moment called The White Cat. It's a story within a story. And the story within the story, the hub or the kernel of the story is, well, I'll tell it to you now. So,
my mother was a queen who loved travelling far and wide, which the king was happy to let her do. One day she came across a castle, and in the castle there was a garden filled with fruit. The fruit filled her with delirious desire, and the fairies within said she could not eat the fruit. But she was so desperate she waited outside those castle walls for days and days, until finally the fairies said, "You can eat the fruit, but you must promise us one thing." They noticed she was with child. "You must promise us your firstborn child." The queen, so desperate for the fruit, agreed. She entered the walls and ate and gorged as much fruit as she could possibly eat, and took away some with her, bringing it home to her husband, my father, who ate happily of the fruit. But then, soon after, a baby was born, and the fairies came for the baby. That baby was me. My father, who knew nothing of the fairies, was so enraged he imprisoned my mother and put me in the castle. But the fairies were too strong. They brought a dragon who ravaged the land, and finally my father relented and gave me back to the fairies. The fairies were very angry with him for imprisoning my mother, and they made him release her. The fairies kept me in a tower and provided me with everything I needed, including a little dog, Tutu, for company. One day, a chevalier passed by my window. He saw me, entered the room, and we became friends. Eventually fell in love and married, with the dog Tutu as our witness. But our happiness was short-lived. The fairies had decided to marry me off to a fairy king. He was horrible. He was a foot high and looked like a monkey. In fact, maybe he even was a monkey. When I refused and told them about the chevalier, they were so enraged, they set the dragon on him and burnt him to a crisp and transformed me into a white cat. They said the only way the spell could be broken is if I could find someone who looked exactly like my chevalier, who would fall in love with me, and then agree to cut off my head and my tail. You, my darling prince, were that man. As soon as I saw your face, I could not believe the similarity, but more than that, you were sweet, gentle, and full of charm and accomplishment. I fell in love with you. Thank you for loving me in return, and for trusting me.
Marry, Catherine, what a delight, a charming story indeed, but I do hope there's more. You do have rather left your heroine hanging, so to speak. And what is to become of her in this world?
Well, indeed, my dear, you would not want to have the fate that I had at such a young age. For when I was just 13 and a half years old, I was ripped from my convent, the convent I was living in, by a man who became my husband, the Baron d'Aulnoy. He was 46 years old, 3 times my age, more than 3 times my age. Disgusting old man. You see, when I was just 9 years old, my father died, and I was sent to the convent to live because my mother had decided to remarry. The convent, I thought, would be a terrible, cruel and cold place, but in fact it was lovely. The nuns looked after me so well, and they taught me to read and write, and I enjoyed a fairly carefree life in the convent. I had chores to do, but mostly I enjoyed myself. But then, just 13 and a half years old, the Baron d'Aulnoy came to my salon. He'd been instructed by my mother to come and steal me from the salon, and well, I was ripped away in a carriage, just 13 and a half, and married to him. And within a year, I'd given birth to our first. I was only 14, still just a child myself. That poor baby died. It was a terrible birth. And then, well, the Count continued to have his way with me again and again, and I gave birth to 4 children by the time I was 19 years old. 2 of them died. I had 2 daughters left, and at the age of 19, I felt like I was maybe broken. It was awful. It was awful.
Oh, how terrible for you.
However, it is not all bad. Certainly the Baron has made your life a misery for so many years, and yet I have heard that misery is not so present anymore. Is it true what I have heard about your husband, the Baron?
Ooh, well, yes, it is.
Charlotte Rose, I should tell you that the Baron has not always been kind to our dear Mary Catherine. No, indeed. He is not what one would wish for in a husband.
Oh, do tell.
What,
my dear? I was married at the age of 13 and a half. Can you believe it? Just 13. I'd been sent to a convent by my mother when my father died, and I lived there happily, with the nuns, and writing and inventing my own fairy tales, as it were. I had a marvelous time as a child. But then, suddenly, at the age of 13 and a half, I was ripped from the convent, abducted, I would say, by a stranger who was 3 times my age. Actually, more than 3 times my age. He was 45. And I was just 13 and a half. The Baron d'Aulnoy. He took me from my wonderful home, and, well, I became the Baroness, but I was only 14. And within a year, we had our first child. I had given birth at the age of 14. It was a terrible experience, and my first child died. And after that, I had 3 more children. 2 survived. But the Baron, he was not a good father. He was not a good husband. He was a gambler and a drinker and a louche. And he was frittering away all our money. It was awful to see. He had so much power over and so much control over us and over our money. When I'm saying us, I'm talking about my mother and me. And we decided, well, we hatched a little plot. Because, we'd heard him talking about how awful he found the king's taxes to be. The king is taxing so many people these days, and, well... So, anyway, one thing and another, he was found guilty for trying to avoid his taxes.
and
What happened to him?
Well, he was sent to the Bastille, no less.
dear. And after all of that, I'm afraid poor Mary Catherine's heart has been sorely battered. No such happy ending for you as happened to your white cat, I fear.
I fear not. I write about love, but for me, it's not something I believe in anymore.